Good afternoon. Finance Committee is called to order. Mr. Johnson, are there any members of the public who have registered and wish to speak?
We have one registered speaker, Omar Vera.
All right. Happy New Year, MTA Board Finance Committee. My third time speaking today, and I would like to first mention how exactly. So, did you which plan did you decide? Did you decide on the $3 fare plan? Because, like I said, I've mentioned this plenty of times before. If you're going to raise the fares, at least bring it with better service. That's what I've told the MTA leadership. We need better service because we're trying to be the role models for all the other metro systems around the world, not just here in the U.S. And that's what we need. And also be sure to at least have discounts, especially for those with low income, because they need to move around like everybody who uses public transportation deserves to ride the subway and buses as well as commuter rails. And last but not least, before I head out, try to bring support for Andrew's freedom ticket proposal, because it will really be beneficial for residents of the outer areas of the city, particularly southeastern Queens, which there isn't really any direct access to the subway. They need better access. And at an affordable price. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.
Thank you. I presume that concludes the public speakers. The minutes for the December 12th meeting are in the committee book. May I have a motion and second? Are there any comments, changes? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed, abstaining, the minutes are approved. Mr. Johnson, would you take us through the work plan, please?
Yeah, in December we presented a draft of the proposed 2017 Finance Committee work plan. That work plan is included in the materials for this month, so we would need a motion on that.
Is there a motion? Second. Any questions or comments on the work plan? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed, abstaining, the work plan passes. Next are the budget and capital cycle items. Mr. Johnson, Budget Watch?
Yeah, so what we do in January, we take a look at 2016 very preliminary results. The focus is on revenues, subsidies, and debt service. The expense information we have is so early and so preliminary that it's really, we don't really focus too much on that because the staffs are doing analysis on those numbers as we speak. So the numbers that I'll be talking about are the numbers compared with the November financial plan estimate for 2016. Those numbers were captured in the materials that the board adopted at December meeting. So starting with passenger revenues, those were virtually on target with the final estimate. Toll revenues were $6.4 million or 0.3% favorable. Debt service expenses were $7.2 million or 0.3% unfavorable. However, that was really because of unfavorable timing charges of $32 million, which were expected to be hit in January. So when that's reversed in January, that will flip. Accepting that timing issue, we actually would have been $25 million favorable in 2016, and that's primarily the result of lower variable rates. Moving to subsidies, TOA subsidies from New York State were on target with the final estimate. Petroleum business tax, or PBT, receipts were $1.6 million or 0.3% unfavorable, which is really pretty much on target. Payroll mobility tax, PMT, receipts were $6.4 million or 0.5% unfavorable, also a very small variance. MTA aid trust account receipts were $2.9 million or 1.0% favorable. So those subsidies in aggregate were pretty much on target. Real estate taxes were lower than the final estimate by $30.6 million, 2.4%, due to lower activity in November and December. We did, however, look at January results, which actually have come in $31 million favorable. So if you were to look at, in a nutshell, the real estate results for the end of 2016 and early 2017, pretty much where we expected to be in the financial plan. So if we were to look at these numbers in aggregate, the numbers that we're reporting in Budget Watch are a little bit unfavorable, but the couple of timing issues that I mentioned actually would make us slightly favorable. So I guess what I'm saying is we're just about where we expected to be in those numbers that were presented in December. Are there any questions? Okay. Next would be Finance Watch, and Olga Chernat is here from the Finance Department.
Hello? Do you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm Olga Chernat. I'm a Deputy Director of Finance. I'm subbing for Pat McCoy, who couldn't be here today. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me take you through the Finance Watch today. I believe it starts on page 20 of your book. Let me just give you some of the highlights of the Finance Watch rather than going through it in detail. So first and foremost, we just closed earlier this month Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Series 2017A and Series 2017B transaction. Series 2017A was $300 million of new money for bridges and projects, capital projects, and Series 2017B was $903 million refunding transaction, which resulted in strong $179 million of present value savings, which translates to 13.8% of refunded par. I want to acknowledge excellent work by senior managers of this transaction. It was led by Goldman Sachs as the book running senior manager, together with special core senior managers, Academy Securities, which is a service disabled veteran-owned firm, Alamo Capital, WBE firm, and Blaylock Bill Van, which is MWBE firm. Also, excellent work on this transaction by our new FA team of Public Resource Advisory Group, PRAG, and their core FA, Baxter McCarley Berry. The other point I'd like to make on the Finance Watch is a change in our upcoming financings. We no longer plan to issue Transportation Revenue Bond Series 2017A in early February. Instead, our first February transaction will be Transportation Revenue Bond Anticipation Notes, which is the second on the list of upcoming transactions in your book. And we will just upsize that transaction from $700 million to $900 million. So unless you have any other questions on this month's Finance Watch, I think we can move on to the year-end report.
With regards to the 2016A, the new bonds, are there, so I appreciate that there's significant savings from the refunding of them, but are there long-term additional costs down the road that exceed the savings over time?
Let me just make sure that I understand your question correctly. It's about Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Series 2017 B bonds, which is a refunding series.
I'm just actually referring to the Finance Watch. There was some information shared with us via email.
Okay.
So for the 2016A, the new bonds. So the ones that are generating, you just talked about them,
Right.
the ones that are generating
Okay.
13.7%.
So all of our refundings are structured to provide savings. We typically take our savings in every year as level savings. There is no increase of any sorts of costs to debt service going forward. The main reason for the refunding is to lower debt service costs going forward. And we had very strong market last year that allowed us that opportunity. I will talk more about this in the year-end report. We issued close to $3 billion of bonds, which provided significant savings to the capital program. And we had a very good window in which we priced Series 2017B refunding bonds earlier this month, and that resulted in the $140 million of present value savings I just talked about. Are there any other questions? Okay, so let's move on to the year-end report then. At the end of 2016, we had $35.7 billion of outstanding debt on our core portfolio. And by core portfolio, I really mean our four main credits: Transportation Revenue Bond Credit, DTF bonds, and TBTA Senior and Subordinate Bonds. Most of our portfolio, as you can see, remains in fixed rate mode, which accounts for 84% of the total portfolio. We have just under 7% of synthetic fixed rate and under 7% of variable rate outstanding, and that actually should position us well in the market where we expect interest rates to increase. We can add more to the variable rate at that point. Our bond anticipation notes account for approximately 2% of total portfolio, and that number will vary year to year depending on our new money bond issuance schedule and the long-term bonds takeout, long-term bonds that will be taking those notes out of the market. I do want to note one thing on this slide is this second bullet, which talks about net increase in debt outstanding of $1.25 billion. This is a little misleading because $1.25 billion actually includes our Hudson Rail Yards obligations. And you might recall this transaction, but it was a one-off transaction that we've done last year. It's not part of our core portfolio. If we just focus on the core portfolio, which again is our four main credits, the year-to-year changes, it pretty much flat on a long-term debt side. So moving on to the next slide. This pie chart shows you how, my main takeaway from the slide is actually that transportation revenue credit is the most important credit to finance our capital program for transit and commuter. It now accounts for 60% of our total debt outstanding. DTF, dedicated tax fund bonds, account for 16% of the total, but as was mentioned before, we only have about $700 million we can issue on this tax, and at that point we'll be pretty much tapped out. TBTA senior and TBTA subordinate credits we mainly use to fund bridges and tunnels capital projects. So, at this point, I think we clearly need to look for other ways to raise revenue, new structures, new credits, to make our borrowing program, to keep our borrowing program efficient. Moving on to debt service. This profile shows that our debt service is pretty much flat through about 2032, and then it drops off going out to 2056. A lot of projects in our capital program have very long useful lives. Through the BAND program, we've been structuring our bonds to reflect that, and we've been issuing 40-year bonds in some instances where we know that projects have very long useful lives. Last year was a very good year. Especially through the early part of it, we enjoyed interest rates coming down through the beginning of the year into June and July. The second part of the year was actually a different dynamic, and the rates went up, particularly towards the second quarter of the year. That was driven by the Fed action in December. It was driven by volume of issuance in the public finance markets, as well as presidential election. So if you look at the 2016 rates, from low to high, the rates moved up by over 100 basis points, 1 percentage point. Yes, go ahead, please.
The acronym MMD, what's that?
The acronym MMD is essentially a benchmark against which we evaluate effectiveness of our borrowing program. But it stands for municipal market data. Okay. Thank you, Bob. Moving on to the next slide. Transaction summary. As you can see, we've been very busy last year. The department brought to market $7.76 billion of bonds. $2.3 billion was new money borrowing, and that part of it was fixed rate bonds, but $1.4 billion of that number is actually bonds. We actually also drew on our RIF loan for positive train control, PTC. It was a successful draw of $146 million, and we anticipate continue with the RIF loan draws going out. We also issued almost $2 billion of long-term fixed-rate bonds to retire outstanding bonds. And as I mentioned before, we issued almost $3 billion of refunding bonds, producing savings of $560 million. That's 16.6% of par funded. And the majority of this savings went to provide additional funding for capital program of MTA. We also did almost $500 million of remarketings on our various variable rate bonds. And the new money that we were able to raise over the course of 2016 funded the capital investments of $2.4 billion last year. Moving on, so this is actually a slide that talks about how well we did relative to our benchmark, which is MMD. We just talked about this. We did 4 new money transactions last year, and then we also issued $1 billion of Hudson Rail Yards obligations. That's the green bar there. That transaction is a unique one-off transaction for us. The reason you see a dashed line and a solid line is because the total interest cost there depends really on how quickly these obligations will amortize, and that's why we wanted to show you the range. I don't think we need to dwell on the remarketing transaction results. The next slide goes over the ban issuance strategy. Again, that's a strategy that was introduced in 2015, and we just continued with it in 2016. The department feels that it has several advantages and is very worthwhile pursuing. Most of our bans are sold on a competitive basis, and you can see, we get strong support from various broker-dealers on our ban transactions. We always look to issue our bonds in most cost-efficient and innovative ways. So one of the examples of that is our green bond issuance. In January of 2016, we issued our first issuance of green bonds, and that was the first time Climate Bond Initiative certified green bond was issued in the U.S. This transaction was very well received by the market. We followed up with another issuance of green bonds on DTF credit, which was also very well received. Many issuers followed in our footsteps. So overall, we feel that our green bond program is a good program and a successful one, and we expect to continue issuing green bonds in 2017. Another example of unique and innovative transactions that the department did in 2016 is Hudson Rail Yards trust obligations. That was about $1 billion of bonds we issued in October of 2016, and the transaction monetized 40 years of 99-year ground lease payments on eastern and western rail yards, providing very needed funding to our capital programs. Our rating picture remains stable. And we continue to work throughout the year in various forms with the investor community to keep them abreast of our borrowing programs, our credit. We have sort of very open policy and have a dedicated staff to address any investor and rating agency inquiries. This is our financing calendar for current year. We expect to borrow $2.6 billion of new money, and that's in the form of bonds and bond anticipation notes. In the first, we also plan to issue $2.3 billion of long-term bonds to take out bans. We'll be doing $860 million of remarketing transactions, and on a refunding front, the big refunding is already behind us. That's $903 million transaction, which I just talked about in the Finance Watch for bridges and tunnels, and we have some callable bonds in third quarter of this year, but it's much smaller amount of $150 million. There is also appendix, but in the interest of time, I'd like to just take any questions you have for me on the presentation and appendix and move on.
Quick question for you. First of all, thank you for not going through the appendix.
Okay.
On the debt by resolution, when you said it's important that we continue to find new revenue streams, is the thought there that despite the fact that we're well below our debt ceiling, that without new revenue streams, we're sort of getting to the point where there's not a lot of headroom for additional debt on the revenues that we presently have? Is that what makes you say that?
Well, it's mainly a reflection on the fact that, for the past, 10, 15 years, we had two main credits to fund our transit and commuter programs. We had transportation revenue credit and we had dedicated tax fund credit. And now dedicated tax fund credit is at capacity. With that, we have less flexibility and less diversification in terms of how we can fund our capital program.
And those other facilities are close to capacity? The other sources of revenue are close to their capacity?
What we're really talking about is just the credit itself. The transportation revenue bond is our workhorse credit. We sell most of our bonds there. You like to have a diversified pool of financing vehicles so that if the market, isn't being overloaded by one credit. Right now, we've found no resistance to the transportation revenue bond. It's still well received. But all we were saying is that the DTF, we basically have bonded up to legal requirements. If the revenue stream continues to increase over time, we could borrow more against it there, but we're getting close to it. And the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel, senior and subordinate, we have capacity there.
So it's really only a matter of diversification,
Yes,
not of,
it.
okay.
That's it.
We're not tapped.
No.
Yes.
What is our current debt service as a proportion of our operating budget?
It's 70.
Well, $2.5 billion out of $16 billion, roughly.
Yeah, I think we've been hovering around 17, 18%.
Yeah.
I think that's about where we are. One of the slides that Olga showed is the amount of retirement of debt. This past year, we retired $944 million worth of debt. So as we continue to sell debt, we are paying off debt as well. So, yes.
Any other questions by any member? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Doug? Okay. Next, we're going to move to headquarter and all agency items. And we have an action item, which is the municipal finance disclosure policies and procedures. So we're seeking to obtain MTA and TBTA board approval of a resolution adopting a municipal finance disclosure policies and procedures. The disclosure policies and procedures primarily formalize existing disclosure practices of MTA and TBTA that are followed in connection with issuances and are intended to reinforce best practices relating to disclosures made in connection with municipal finance offerings and required periodic filings.
Any questions? Motion? Second? All those in favor?
Okay. We have another report and an information item. That's the draft of the Independent Auditor's Review Report of MTA Consolidated Interim Financial Statements as of and for the 9-month period ended September 30th, 2016. That's on Director's desk. That will be presented and voted on later today at the Audit Committee meeting. So next we're going to move to procurements, and Angel Barbosa is here to discuss those.
Thank you, Doug. For headquarters, there are 7 procurements, 1 non-competitive and 6 competitive, for a grand total of $174 million. We also have a walk-in procurement that was handed off to you before the meeting started. The 1 competitive miscellaneous services contract procurement is to New Canvas Digital Incorporated to upgrade Metro North's existing train time application in order to comply with current app technology standards and properly support current generation devices for a total of $194,000. This is a 1-year agreement. We have 6 competitive procurements for a total of $173 million. We're seeking board approval for 5 competitively negotiated personal service contracts for which we received 318 proposals for Arts for Transit projects at 5 New York City Transit subway stations on the Astoria line. We're also requesting the board approve the award of 2 competitively negotiated all-agency miscellaneous service contracts to Universal Protection System Services, doing business as Allied Universal Security Services and Summit Security Services, for unarmed, armed, and security operations center monitoring security services for a period of 5 years. This is a procurement for approximately $172 million. And the walk-in procurement that was handed off earlier in the meeting is a recommendation to the board that you approve the award of 4 competitively negotiated all-agency personal services contracts to provide medical services to screen, manage, coordinate, and monitor medical treatment for select employees for obstructive sleep apnea testing and treatment for MTA agencies employees. Each contract will be awarded on a $0 basis. The firms will perform monitoring of medical treatment for selected employees for obstructive sleep apnea testing and treatment based on geographic coverage areas for MTA agencies employees on an as-needed basis for a 3-year period and 2-year options. This is a $7.5 million procurement. Chairman.
Veronica?
On the new Canvas digital procurement, so the total amount is 194, but then it says there's a fixed fee of 111. Where's the other 83,000?
Maintenance. Maintenance, yeah.
Okay. And how popular of an app is this? And I ask because I have this app and I have probably 5 or 6 others.
Well, I think Sid can give you an update on the future of the...
So what it actually is the train time app for Metro North Railroad. It is very popular. We also have the same app for New York City Transit and Long Island Railroad. The reason why we need this extension is 2 of the products were developed in-house. Metro North developed theirs out-of-house. We're looking to bring them all together into one MTA time app, but we need a little time to do it, so we need the 1-year extension.
One thing just before I ask for a vote on these procurements, I did speak with MTA leadership earlier to encourage them that we expedite the screening under the sleep apnea contract. So I just want to reinforce that we need to get these contracts in place ASAP, and we need to do the initial screenings and at least prioritize by looking at risk MTA employees and get these apnea tests underway. I think it's an important way to assure the riding public that we're doing everything humanly possible when it comes to their safety when they're riding on the train. So I just want to make sure that the other committee members know that I have the assurance and support that we're going to move on this expeditiously. With that on the record, I have a motion. Ask for a motion. Second. All those in favor? Thank you.
So there are no procurements financed for Metro North and Long Island Railroad, but New York City Transit and MTA bus operations has 2 procurements, 1 non-competitive and 1 competitive, for a grand total of $101 million. The 1 non-competitive sole source procurement for transit is for the purchase of 110 low-floor, 60-foot articulated compressed natural gas buses for an estimated amount of $95 million. And the 1 competitive procurement is a request for board approval for a budget adjustment for additional funds for a total of $5.9 million for continued maintenance and support, as well as programming of new enhancements for the paratransit scheduling dispatching software program. Chairman?
Second. All those in favor?
For bridges and tunnels, we have 1 competitive procurement for the modification of a public works contract for a total of $24.2 million. Bridges and Tunnel is seeking board approval to amend a public works contract with Defoe Incorporated for the necessary civil, structural, and electrical infrastructure for open road tolling at the Manhattan approach to the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge for the total amount of $24.2 million. Chairman?
Second. All those in favor?
There are no FIMTAC items completed.
Okay, you'll note that MTA consolidated financial and operational reports can be found on pages 52 to 109. And finally, we have Jeff with the real estate agenda.
Thanks, Doug. We have 2 action items this month, both for Long Island Railroad. They're relatively minor items described in your staff summaries. Unless there are questions, I would ask for approval. Yes, sir.
Will the
Mr. Mertler?
will the one involving the Bronx near the Amtrak line have any impact at all on the proposed 4 stations? Turning over the land to the city of New York.
You're referring, I think, to one of the info items.
Correct.
No, my understanding is it will not.
No.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Motion? Second? All those in favor? Now we just need a motion to adjourn. Second? Thank you.